So we've got Jocelyn Spence, and she's presenting on behalf of herself and also on behalf of Leisha Calvin. And Jocelyn is from the Digital World Research Centre in the University of Surrey in the UK. And so the title of her paper is Engaging Audiences in Museums in a Performance Way. So, there we go. Jocelyn.
Yeah, I use a Mac, so I'm really So hello, my name is Jocelyn Spence, and I co-wrote this with Leisha Calvin from the Breda University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, and unfortunately she can't be here, so I'm trying my best to represent both of our contributions. So I'll get started. A report by the European Commission from the end of 2012 on the future of EU funding program for the cultural and creative sectors indicates that almost 60% of the public across Europe never attend live performances or visit cultural heritage sites, and in most countries, well below 20% of the population actively engaged in artistic activities. Additionally, according to the Survey for Public Participation in the Arts, released in 2013, the percentage of Americans visiting art museums and galleries has dropped by 21% since its peak, and the percentage of Americans touring a park, a monument, a building, or neighborhood for historic or design value has dropped by over a third since its peak. In terms of audience size, art museums have lost 5 million visitors, and history has lost over 8 million visitors since their respective peaks. And other museum types, such as science museums and science centers and children's museums, are not doing better. But this same SPPA report shows that participation in the arts, which they're including history, is it's not dying. It's just that the traditional institutions that used to be responsible for delivering the arts are becoming less relevant over time. That is, it isn't necessarily the art or history itself, but how it's presented and how it's shared that's no longer so attractive for the public. Now, various recent examples from several artistic disciplines, such as theater and music, demonstrate the growing importance of audience participation of various kinds as a means to experience art, to connect with the artwork at an emotional level. Now, this is possible if the artwork becomes alive first. This takes place when the visitor sees, experiences, and interacts with it. So this picture is a lying concert at the Concert Gebouw, which I badly mispronounce, the most important music hall in Amsterdam. The music is called Canto Ostinato. It was composed by a Dutch composer in the 1970s. It is itself an open piece of music where the execution of the performance is improvised, and it depends on the dialogue between two pianists. And the experience is intensified for the audience by lying down. And there are other similar examples where the audience has a more active role, like Punch Drunks, the Drowned Band, which has been in London, which is a great example of immersive theater where the audience is free to choose where they want to go and what they want to see. So if we're talking about how art should be presented and shared more actively, we are looking at the question of how to engage museum audiences with a combination of two different approaches. So one of those approaches is performance, which can mean a traditional play staged in a regular theater, like you would imagine, or it can mean a number of alternatives, like this performance artist standing upside down with his head in a bucket. I love this guy. Or live art, participatory performance, site-specific performance, and so on. And then there's also the unfortunate accident of the English language where the adjective form, performative, gets shared with the word performativity, which is, of course, different. You've got Irving Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life, or Judith Butler's performativity, where just existing is a type of performance. So we're aiming to use as our starting point the sort of quote-unquote actual or artistic performance. And our other perspective, besides performance, is human-computer interaction, which we shorten to HCI, which studies how people interact with digital technologies. So the image here is 4 photos, which is a centerpiece for your dinner table, And what it does is it displays photos from your and your dinner party guests' Facebook feeds. And so this is an example of an HCI design that's encouraging conversational performance. So we developed a taxonomy based on the results of a survey in the HCI literature to see how the term performance was being used. And of course, this is just one tiny, tiny lens into the entire topic of digital research and the humanities and the arts, but it's a useful starting point. So what we found in the HCI literature is that different researchers latched onto different meanings for performance. Portrayal is the term for invoking performance when you're communicating concepts or narratives, but without any digital technology. The second one, enactment, is using performance theory to focus on the embodied and the social nature of performing in an interaction, but that kind of loses the idea of audience. The next one is staging, is the term for looking at multiple users using a system or device in a public setting. So you've got the digital and the audience. And the engagement category takes staging one step further because it recognizes the different roles people might play with the system. Some people would be actively performing, others might be actively spectating, others might be accidental bystanders and not knowing what's going on. Now, I should make really clear that the performances that I'm about to show you the analyses of, they don't necessarily claim themselves to be performances. We've started our analysis of ways that museums are trying to engage their audiences using this taxonomy because live performance is a way to study audience engagement over the course of a durational event, like a visit to a museum, and so many approaches use digital technologies. So the four examples we're about to present fit neatly into these categories. One is not digital at all, which is portrayal. One is primarily digital, but engages with only one user at a time, which is enactment. One is a combination of digital and multiple users, but it's fairly passive and relies more on performativity than performance, which is staging. And one has absolutely everything you could possibly hope for in engagement, multiple performers, multiple types of spectators, and a digital system, but it's contextualized only as a game. So let me show you what they are. The first one, I love this, the cockroach tour of the Science Museum of London. So you put on a cockroach costume and you follow your cockroach guide, and he's in a cockroach costume, and he addresses you as if you were a cockroach and gives you a tour of a cockroach's perspective of those wacky things those humans get up to in science. So this is portrayal. They're getting people involved in performance and narrative and context, but of course there's no digital technology. The tour guide is definitely giving a performance, and then his audience members are giving a performance of their own because they're dressed up like cockroaches and scuttling around like cockroaches. So our next example is Van Gogh Yourself. It's an online project where you and your friends reenact famous paintings. So here we have a lady being Vermeer's milkmaid, and she probably also used the Van Gogh Your site self to share that photo on Facebook and whatnot. So this would be classed as enactment because she's using digital technology to use her body and her space to physically embody something. This is Riot 1831 at Nottingham Castle. They describe it as a promenade performance, although I would argue it's more of a promenade staging, according to the taxonomy. Museum goers can view augmented reality animations based on personal histories connected to various museum objects associated with this riot that took place in the castle. There is a linear narrative throughout the museum connecting all the objects, but visitors can access each individual bit in a nonlinear way. So this means that each museum goer stitches together the individual pieces to make sense of the whole story in a different way from everyone else. So the photo on the left shows two people using an installed iPad, but they could also use their own devices. And this photo is a screenshot of one of the augmented reality images you can see when you use it. So this is staging. So you've got a number of users interacting with a system or devices, using it to move through a public space. But each individual clip is primarily a cinematic experience. I mean, you can move the device to see it from different angles, but you're still in this one spot looking at this one story. There's less of a focus on how museum goers interact with each other or with the museum as a whole. This is Capture the Museum, and it's a game. It builds itself as a game for visitors to the National Museum of Scotland. So visitors assemble into two teams, and they have 30 minutes to solve puzzles to gain points that will help their team capture various bits of the museum. And this falls under the category of engagement because you have multiple users charging around this public space in collaboration with each other. They're performing this role of team member on a quest. And the rest of the museum goers are spectating them. They're forming an audience. They're wondering what all the ruckus is about. So what do we do with this? How do we find out what good this is doing? Well, we turn to performance theorist Erica Fischer-Lichte. Among many other things, she talks about heightened attention as a way that audiences engage with a performance event. And it basically functions on three levels. You have heightened attention to objects, conspicuousness, and you have heightened attention to human actors or spectators, and then heightened attention to the structure of the event as a whole, and that happens through deviations or surprises in that structure. So, if we go back to our four examples using the lens of heightened attention, it becomes easier to see what the audience is actually engaging with. The cockroach tour creates high conspicuousness of the museum objects because it invites the audiences to take a new point of view on them. It also makes them more intensely aware of their own appearance with the cockroach suit on, and the bystanders are more intensely aware of you people in your crazy cockroach suits. And of course, at that moment of taking on the cockroach persona, you have a lot of deviation and surprise compared to the rest of your day, but really quickly that becomes normalized. So across the event, there's not so much. Van Gogh yourself makes people very, very aware of the details of the photo of the painting that they're dealing with. So while they're recreating this painting, they must perceive themselves with more intensity because they're trying to emulate it. And anyone who might happen to see them would see them with more intensity. But it's not a performance event with a durational sort of structure. So there's no built-in opportunity for deviation or surprise, although it could be possible. And because a certain degree of reinterpretation of this painting is allowed in the moment that you have to create it, you can have surprise or deviation from the original painting. And you can see some of these in the examples online. This project supports audiences to rediscover classical paintings, engage with them through playful interactions, and connect emotionally to them. Riot 1831 might make the museum objects more conspicuous, or those objects might kind of fade into the background as tools for triggering these augmented reality stories. There will be some degree of participants regarding themselves more intensely when they use this shared technology in public. You're aware of people looking at you using it, but probably not so much. And because there's a linear narrative that visitors can access from different entry points, the result is a non-linear experience. So you could consider that as deviation from a structure, depending on how each visitor makes sense of the experience, but it's not really solid. Capture the Museum is similar to Riot 1831 in the sense that it might heighten attention to the museum objects, or the game might actually subordinate those objects to the needs of the game, trying to solve these puzzles. It's similar to the cockroach tour in making the audiences perceive each other more intensely, even more so because they have to actively work together. There might be deviation and surprise because it is a time-bound event, but it's unclear how relevant that is. But this is the only one of these cases discussed in this paper that makes such a special use of the museum's physical space. Even the cockroach tour, which has visitors explore the space, doesn't support them in really taking it over quite so strongly. And in this way, this sort of appropriation is similar to the Van Gogh yourself approach, in which the users have to recreate or reenact the painting using the spaces and the materials they have at hand. Capture the Museum, of course, doesn't involve recreation, but reappropriation of the museum's physical space that involves visitors in celebrating museum space. So in the course of doing this analysis, some questions arose. First of all, can a digital technology create a shift in audience point of view like the cockroach tour guide did? How might we present the stories behind objects more interactively? And what exactly are we getting audiences to engage with? With the physical objects in a physical museum, or the representations online like Van Gogh yourself, or maybe the interesting facts behind them? And that sort of raises the question of what are museums for? That's a big question for 15 minutes. So if it sounds reasonable that we would want to heighten the audience's attention in all of these areas, well, what would we have? We would have something that heightens the conspicuousness of objects, as with the change of point of view in the cockroach tour. We'd have something that intensifies the intensity of appearance of the humans involved, possibly through creating group identity, through piquing interest, and through encouraging people to take initiative. we have something that creates a sense of experience and unity of the entire events of going to the museum or cultural heritage site, so that it can have something from which to deviate and to create surprise. So we argue that, at least in the case of cultural heritage, there should be an explicit consideration of the concept of space and place, and the social component derived from transforming space into place. The Capture the Museum case demonstrates the potential of reappropriating a museum space and making it personal to visitors in a new way if we adopt Lyotard's definition of place, as space combined with memory. So, can technology help to achieve this? We see that it can in Capture the Museum, and to a lesser degree in the other three projects. They open up for audiences to enter and transform physical spaces into experiential places, whether by infesting them with their cockroachness, or imagining their photo of Vermeer's milkmaid hanging in the Rijksmuseum, or finding their own path through the augmented reality story of the 1831 riots, or racing through the National Museum to solve a puzzle. And in a related way, these projects also demonstrate that performative engagement with technology can bring a work of art or cultural heritage closer to an audience by changing the audience's point of view. In other words, by changing their experience of the place based on their performative experience with that place. A cockroach sees science differently than a 16-year-old does. Vermeer's milkmaid is not so elevated that I can't make my own version. The riot of 1831 isn't so distant if I can participate in the story through augmented reality in the actual building that actually burned. And the National Museum isn't so lofty if I can play a game in it. So these performative experiences imbue cultural heritage spaces with personal meaning, which is even more powerful when the experiences heighten the visitor's attention to the objects, the people, and the event, as well as place. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Jocelyn. That is before time. Not bad. So our next speaker is Dennis Moser, Associate Librarian of the University of Alaska and head of the Alaska Region Total Collections Archives. Sounds fascinating. So Dennis, I'll leave you to the top of your paper.
She didn't want to add that I was chief hairball and cat herder, but that usually takes up a lot of my time. This is actually subtitled 15 Things to Think About for History and Memory. And it's intended to be something in the way of a provocation rather than a scholarly paper detailing problems and solutions. Rather, I'd like you to think about some of the problems and some of the solutions that might be there. The first order of business: destroy the archives. Destruction of cultural heritage has been used as a weapon for quite some time and is still rampant in this day and age. How better to subjugate than to eradicate the memory of a people's existence? Libraries and archives are not spared, and the looting of museums comes as little surprise in the news these days. That we respond to these acts in the way that we do only reminds us of the fundamental potency of the institutions being destroyed. And someone forgot to change the text. Memory and forgetting. This is a review of Heriberto Lopez's Empire of Neo-Memory. The significance of such a work is that from memory comes creativity to beget new memory. As we combine and recycle themes to create new works, keeping the heritage alive and thriving. And each generation is driven to carry out this process in its own way. The right to be forgotten, just as important as the right to be remembered. How do we reconcile this emerging consideration of the right to forget, which is currently under consideration as law in the EU, especially in light of revelations that have taken place of what the US government will do? The right to be forgotten, as it has become known, would complicate the collection and digitization of mundane public documents, birth reports, death notices, real estate transactions, and the like that form the first draft of history. Today, and I'm quoting from this article, Facebook, email, Twitter, this is the correspondence of the 21st century, according to Jean-Philippe Lebois, president of the Association of French Archivists, which has around 1,700 members. If we want to understand the society of today and the future, we have to keep certain traces. To date, they have something on the order of 50,000 signatures supporting this petition to counter the legislation of the right to forget. They don't expect to be able to stop it, but they do hope to at least moderate it a little bit. Where does it go when we die? Stop and think about what would happen. How would your digital traces be dealt with? One of the considerations is that corporations that are responsible for allowing us to put these things online actually have tried to institute policies. Facebook, not the first to create a specialized policy for deceased users, but it has one of the highest profiles because of the way it handled the issue. Instead of merely agreeing to let a family member take control of the account, the company instead decided to take things a step further and let people turn someone's account into a memorial. This is helpful for two reasons. First, it preserves the user's identity online so that people can come to the page, read about him or her, and leave posts on the wall in remembrance. To those of us who live our lives online, that's a little more terrifying than the thought of completely disappearing. And we like, for our friends, it's an interesting choice of words, like friends Facebook, who have moved on to stay around online as well. However, we don't like to be constantly reminded about that person's disappearance. So when Facebook converts an account into a memorial, the person in question no longer pops up in the friend suggestion, and the article says that might be awkward. The person's profile also automatically becomes private to everyone but confirmed friends, so vandals can't come by and trash the place without anyone there to clean up. Contact information gets removed and no one can log into the account in the future. MySpace. MySpace has a deceased user policy, but let's just say it's less robust than Facebook's. It's more of a standard policy that doesn't put as much thought into issues like privacy and searches, but it's there nonetheless. In the case of the MySpace profile, the next of kin must contact MySpace via email with the user's proof of death and the user's MySpace ID, not the username. The policy says that unfortunately we can't let you access, edit, or delete any of the content or settings on the user's profile yourself, but we'll be sure to review and remove any content you find objectionable. Anything tied to a Google account. Anything tied to a Google account is actually, it's kind of a good thing insofar as Google oversees the whole process for all of these. We just leave it as is unless someone was able to access it, according to a Google spokesperson, meaning that without any intervention, a friend or family member's post will remain online indefinitely. If you don't want them to remain, or if you need access to the person's Gmail account, for whatever reason, you must follow the steps outlined in the help section on Google. You must be a lawful representative of the deceased, which means friends are out, and be able to provide proof of that authority. You must also include proof of death and full email header from the person in question to show that the person knew and was in contact with you. After that, Google needs 30 days to process the documents and notes that a valid third-party court order or other appropriate legal process may get you access soon. Technological history. What's happening to the documentation that describes the evolution of scientific and technological developments across innumerable fields? Pockets of material are probably being preserved in various industries and university research facilities, but as far as I know, there's no concerted effort to store a broad base of technology documentation. The writer sees two compelling reasons for technology-focused preservation. First, we already take steps to protect other kinds of history, including cultural artifacts such as music, art, literature, film, and photographs. Political history, wars, election laws, and so on, is similarly well covered. Yet culture and politics are directly influenced by technology, so a lack of technological history would give us a poor and incomplete understanding of the 20th century. Second, preserving information in a non-digital format is a hedge against digital disaster. Besides the historical research, there is another reason for preserving physical material in addition to search for digital documentation. The ability to be able to recreate a technology if our digital information goes away. That may seem apocalyptical, and hopefully the probability is minute, but we really don't know as our digital, electrical, and electronic age is very young in historic terms. What would happen if the sun geomagnetic storm of 1859 at Carrington event that was much stronger than anything seen since were to occur again? Are people like Evgeny Morozov finally getting people's attention that Silicon Valley isn't necessarily going to be capable of providing answers through what he calls solutionism, that maybe we need more than just TED Talks to address the issue? Or as I would like to subtitle this section, the hubris of the endeavor, or perhaps the desperation. There was a paper published actually 2 years ago, next month, entitled Losing My Revolution: How Many Resources Shared on Social Media Have Been Lost. It's by Haney Salah Dean and Michael Nelson. And I'm happy to provide the references because it hasn't disappeared yet. Social media content has grown exponentially in recent years, and so the role of social media has evolved from just narrating life events to actually shaping them. In this paper, we explore how many resources shared in social media are still available on the live web or in public web archives. By analyzing 6 different event-centric data sets of resources shared in social media in the period from June 2009 to March 2012, we found that about 11% lost and 20% archived after just a year, and an average 27% lost and 41% archived after 2.5 years. Furthermore, we found a nearly linear relationship between the time of sharing the resource and the percentage lost, with a slightly less linear relationship between time of sharing and archiving coverage of the resource. From this model, we conclude that after the first year of publishing, nearly 11% of shared resources will be lost, and after that, we will continue to lose 0.02% per day. This does not even begin to address the issue of technical glitches, such as occurred this last year with Twitter and tweets suddenly disappearing and reappearing. What are we going to do about hardware? Well, it says here, we cannot all become museums of computer hardware. These are wonderful organizations, there are wonderful organizations like the Computer History Museum, the National Museum of Computing, the Heinz Historic Museums Forum, and the Center for Computing History that serve that purpose well. And none of this dimensions the feeling that hardware should be collected and preserved. These are artifacts from our computing history. Game walkthroughs is a metaphor for web preservation. Quote, walkthroughs are fascinating to me because they capture the essence of the game from the point of view of a particular player in what can be thought of as migration. Recording and uploading what was originally an ephemeral experience. Obviously, the gameplay is canned and not interactive, but in some sense, the expertly played, in this case, Star Raiders session, does a better job of conveying the essence of 1981 than emulation, at least with respect to the 10-minute investment that the YouTube video represents. Personally, I'm not convinced. couldn't resist, song and dance, as the original time-based performance preservation. A brief snippet of some of the efforts to preserve dance and related performance art through digital technologies. The interesting thing is that historically we have a wonderful tradition of documentation and preservation of documentation that precedes digital technology. Well, Kesselgraphie by Clement Tarbeau is 500 plus years old, did a great job of preserving not only dance, music, but text and social behavior, all in this interesting random access device called a book. They still work. Artistic afterlives. For $49.95 a year, starting rate, HOBA, where the arts live, promises to promote and preserve the creative work of exceptional artists who have died without recognition of the full measure of their talents and creative legacies. A web-based nonprofit essentially providing a platform for grieving families and estate managers or anyone else who owns the rights to a creative legacy to publish and expose their dead loved ones' lasting artistic expressions. Let's get personal. Interesting little posting on the Library of Congress. The writer identified a whopping sample of 20 people and asked them how they managed to preserve their digital documents, what their long-term plans were for their digital stuff. Interviewees were from varied backgrounds, including a policeman, a cartoonist, a restaurant owner, a lawyer, an artist, a designer, a librarian, graduate students, retired professors, a social worker, government employees, and a software developer. I was struck by the range of people that he talked to. I just wish he had a larger sample. Came up with 6 categories in their response. One category, delete everything. I think there's a book here. Near the end of my life, create a condensed collection with selected documents. Third category, sort and distribute documents to people and entities, such as family documents to individual family members and work-related documents to colleagues. Not to the company. No particular plan at this moment, but will eventually leave instructions in a will for disposal or access. Number 5, allow caretakers or others to manage, select, and keep things as they want. And lastly, expect materials to be lost or deleted eventually. The reasons for preservation that they gave: potential usefulness for other people, such as family history or other research, a wish to be remembered by family and friends, sentimental attachment to certain documents, photos, recordings, video, or other digital things. Reasons for deletion: desire not to leave any trace behind, concerns for privacy, personal natures of documents, that is, my documents are just for me, belief in future disinterest in my documents. But let's continue. This is from an announcement for the 4th Personal Digital Archiving Conference. Yes, there have been 4 of them. One theme for the conference: privacy, ethics, and the paradox of persistence. At the heart of digitality is a paradox. On the one hand, we know that so much of what we want to preserve cannot last without assertive intervention, threatened as it is by bit rot, rapid format obsolescence, and fugitive online services, and acts of war. At the same time, the things we want to make disappear are deleted photos, private chats, contact information that could put someone's life in jeopardy, live on in corporate databanks, in other people's collections, and online. Yes, closing it. All is not lost. We have top men on top of it. And actually, I'm not being sarcastic, actually. John Ippolito is one of the co-founder of Stillwater, along with Jolene Blaze, and it's a laboratory dedicated to studying construction of creative networks. as well as being a member of the Variable Media Network. And he and Richard Reinhardt have recently released a book entitled Recollections, Art, New Media, and Social Memory. Another leading individual has been Fino Reddy, who's a New York-based media technologist. He's an archivist and conservator of Born Digital Works of Contemporary Arts, currently at MoMA, previously with Verizon. It does exist. This was a 3-year art conservation project of the ZK Center for Art and New Media, Karlsruhe. They've done significant work in trying to deal with variable media. And finally, the real nut. Your archives are not archives. You're a digital archivist. I also keep an archive of my blogs. It's not the same thing. And I'll simply conclude by quickly going through some of the definitions from the Society of American Archivists glossary of archival and records terminology. Archival records are materials created or received by a person, family, or organization, public or private, in the conduct of their affairs that are preserved because of the enduring value contained in the information they contain, or as evidence of the functions and responsibilities of their creator. Archive, to transfer records from the individual or office of creation to a repository authorized to appraise, preserve, and provide access to those records. Without the institutional support, we do not have the sustainability that is required for the scholarly record or for the recreation of work with any level of authenticity. Thank you.
Silicon Valley venture capitalist Martin Friesen says software is leading the world. What he means by this is we're living in a digital era, and that everything software touches, it consumes. It has become a medium that is used to describe the ongoing digitization of our world. Paul's working with the personal estate of Cork short story writer Frank O'Connor, and I'm working with the personal estate of UCC's first mathematician and logician, George Boole. Our roles have become in part that of archivists, surrogates. Possible explanations for this are due to the current economic climate or changes in academic structures or the distribution of skill sets in a changing technological landscape. Based on our observations as digital humanists working as stand-in archivists, here are some reflections. In contrast to larger institutions, we find ourselves taking on many of the tasks of an archive and working in close conjunction with our colleagues in the archive. So our methodology, we propose a hybrid methodology for research-led digital archive creation. This methodology is part software engineering, part critical and conceptual analysis. The combination of theory and practice of building and theorizing has been a challenge that has been highlighted by the theory-practice debates in the digital humanities. We propose that theory should not be excluded from practice because they are integral parts of scholarship in the digital world. This hybrid methodology spans disciplines and mirrors the more integrated world of the humanities and computing sciences. By hybrid, we mean a mixing of the quantitative and qualitative methods, dissolving this distinction. Paul Rosenblum's description of this integration using the concept of the great scientific domain is a useful platform, as is Jacques Derrida's proposal for a general and interdisciplinary science of the archive, which he calls archiviology.
So, based on our work, what we've noticed are these theoretical points of contention. So, as Susan mentioned, the title of our paper is The Cultural Heritage Treadmill. We use this analogy of the treadmill because there is a perception that digital media brings the past closer to the present. Marlene Manoff calls this perception the archival effects of digitization. She claims that digitization provides greater access to the past, fuller access to the present, and a reshaping of historical consciousness. However, we critique Manoff's argument because this greater access is only an illusion of progress. Paradoxically, akin to how a treadmill operates, there is progression-stagnation effect. There is only the appearance that we are getting closer to the past by increasing access to it, but we are not getting any closer. It remains at arm's length. We may have greater access to archival material with digital archives, but it doesn't assist in our interpreting of the past. As Manoff claims, the writing of history requires a human interpreter, but a digital archive, an additional interpreter is introduced. This is what we call a machinic interpreter. However, a digital archive is a human-machine hybrid system. It is more accurate to say that a digital archive involves a human-machinic interpreter because the digital does not supplant the archive, nor does the machine supplant the archivist. Both the traditional archive and the digital archive operate together in a complementary way. We call this the effect reverse effect of digitalization. According to Kathleen Fitzpatrick, preservation is no longer the responsibility of the library post-publication. Digital preservation shifts the responsibility from the gatekeepers of information onto others. This is part of the deinstitutionalization and delocalization of the archive. Because both authoritative control and spatial control of the archival material is relinquished somewhat. In planned obsolescence, Fitzpatrick is looking for a speedier form of publication, for a bidirectional interaction between author and reader, for collaborative instead of individual authorship, and the perception of textual fluidity as opposed to the stasis associated with print. Similarly, these goals parallel that of the digital archive. The digital archive provides a speedier form of access. It creates a bidirectional interaction between archivist and user. It facilitates collaborative archivization with crowdsourcing instead of the archivist performing the role alone. The digital archive also acts as a fluid space like the fluid text it preserves.
In working with digital archives, here are some of the theoretical fallacies we've uncovered. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with them from campus testing the digital humanities. There's the static versus fluid fallacy. The common metaphor in the digital humanities is that the printed page is static and the digital text is fluid or dynamic. This is not the case because the digital is so easily copyable. Once a piece of information enters the digital sphere, it becomes exceedingly difficult to modify or remove. If one imagines the monk in the cell patiently transcribing, you can see that errors will creep into that process, implying that the printed text is in fact less stable than first imagined. The ephemerality fallacy. Another common metaphor is that the digital is intangible and that the printed work is substantial. Again, this is not the case. The digital is every bit as real. It's just a different type of materiality and every bit as tangible as paper or print media. The net is public fallacy. The internet is seen as a public space. By inspection of the protocols and technologies involved, we see that it is in fact a peer-to-peer network of networks of nodes, all private. There is no equivalent of the public square on the internet, and the highways of the information superhighway take virtually no time to traverse, and while you make your journey, you don't get to see fellow travelers, but the highway owners, who are also private, do. The digital rupture fallacy. The last commonly repeated misconception is that our new digital era is somehow a radical break with the past. This is far from true. We don't have the time to delve into this now, but if you were to perform a conceptual analysis of the digital, you will see that the features of it have been present in social settings such as language, in the postal system, and so on. When theoreticians come to analyze our digital world, like digital archives, because they carry these misconceptions with them, they end up making false claims.
Right, so we've discussed the theoretical fallacies of the digital that are actually negative to the creation of digital archives. But here are some theoretical frameworks beneficial to digital archivization. The three main figures that appear throughout the literature for digital humanities that come up time and time again would be Heidegger, Foucault, Derrida, but they're relevant in relation to our discussion of digital archives. In Heidegger's The Question Concerning Technology, he characterizes technology as an enframing and a standing reserve. His enframing makes technology a kind of truth-making, a self-revealing, but this overburdens the truth-making process, and we reject it. His standing reserve gets closer. We feel that technology is best characterized as an activity that builds upon itself. And the idea of potentiality or standing reserve aims at this characterization. Furthermore, the archive is theorized in the works of Archive Fever by Derrida and Archaeology of Knowledge by Foucault. We are in agreement with Derrida that technology must necessarily bring about changes in how the archive operates. We agree with Foucault's claims that neutrality of the archive is called into question with each decision to include or exclude. As repositories of historical facts and cultural artifacts, archives are highly selective spaces. Derrida attempts but fails to fully give voice to the archival compulsion. Derrida alludes to the psychological nature of this compulsion, but does not consider the sociological effects. Therefore, we propose that this archive fever, or Malda archive, is a psychosocial phenomenon because it not only involves the drives and desires of the individual, but also the collective communication of history by society. Now, we must not also forget to mention as well that there is other additional factors other than psychological and sociological, such as economic, political, cultural as well. And that Marlene Manoff touches upon in her essays.
Finally, we're moving from theory to practice, not the specifics of the practice, so we're not going to talk about any technology stats or anything like that, but more the process involved in turning an archive into a digital archive. As we mentioned in the abstract of this paper, going online is shorthand for digitalization, making of database making, hosting, transcribing, annotating, semantic networking. We would like to make these explicit if we may. By digitalization is meant the creation of digital facsimiles of archiving material. Database making is putting structure on the data of some sort. By hosting is meant placing the archive in a network accessible setting. By transcription is meant the turning of raw graphical images into machine parsable text. By semantic annotation is meant the choosing of significant terms for indexing. By semantic networking is meant the information linking across archives to form a web of knowledge. So the following steps are represented by the DRHA pyramid, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, which we probably digitalization. The first step of the process, the digital service, scans or files, enhance the preservation of the original. I'm going to give positives and negatives to each step. Enhance the preservation of the original material by serving as faithful proxies to them, but also tangibility is sacrificed. Like all other digital material, these surrogates are easily and cheaply copied, which is positive from the perspective of information sharing, but a negative from the perspective of property and copyright holders. A further negative is those on the wrong side of the digital divide are excluded. In database making, you can have either hierarchical or relational. What is gained here are you gain multi-ordering and arrangements for free, whereas with regular archives, you traditionally just have a set hierarchical ordering. What maybe is lost here is that the structure of the database technology shapes the structure of the data. Hosting. In this stage, what is gained is a global access and reach, and what is lost is control. Tactics to mitigate this include watermarking, strict legal ramifications, technological crippling, and the like. Stable URLs are not very important at this stage because humans can recover from link rot. Transcription.
So the third step involves the extraction of text as image into text as machine encoded text, or in other words, the transformation of data into information. By necessity, firstly, something is sacrificed and something is gained. What is attained is machine searchability, a reduction in size, an emphasis on the textual content of the material, which is frequently what you want. What is sacrificed is structural integrity, the presentation and the layout format of the text. There are those who argue that the addition of meaning or interpretation commences with textual encoding and markup. So then the fourth stage is, the fifth stage is the semantic networking, or semantic annotation. So that deals with the additional meaning to the text. As we said, significant terms are highlighted. The software automatically creates an indexable list of heading terms. So this would be this is a concordance similar to Father Roberto Busta's Thomas Aquinas index that is believed to be the first project carried out in humanities computing. As the significant terms are enriched with meaning, you pass from concordance to annotated addition to digital scholarly addition. Even though it could be argued that we have moved beyond the digital process per se, there are still positives and negatives involved. What is attained at this point is a layer of meaning and the lens of scholarship, but what is sacrificed is the authentic interaction with the unadulterated text. So the final stage is semantic networking, and it amalgamates step 2 and step 4, because by allowing the material to become a part of shared cultural indices and aggregators via uniform standards like the Linking Open Data Initiative, a network of information is facilitated. So stable or persistent URLs are vital at this stage to allow machine-to-machine communication. What is gained at this level is data exchange, disambiguation of terms, machine interoperability, and automation with decreased human intervention. At present, it's difficult to say what is sacrificed at this level, but it appears that democracy is lost with the semantic web in comparison to the regular web. The barrier for entry of the individual is higher because at this moment it appears to be controlled by the domain of institutions. This neatly brings us back to archives and their deinstitutionalization and delocation that we have previously discussed.
We hope we've shed some light on our work. Thanks.
Is called Archive Act, designing modes of storytelling with a living archive.
Just a moment, is that okay for you?
Yeah, I reckon that's it. Want to read that down?
I'm not quite sure we can do
No, I see.
is that too dark for you?
How about that? Yeah. There we go. That's it. Okay, so I want to talk today about a series of projects that I've been working on with a number of other artists and researchers, some of whom are also speaking at this conference over the next few days. Projects which are pursuing questions of how digital media technologies can change the way that we encounter and make meaning of our cultural memories, and how we thereby possibly construct our cultural histories. The first of these projects is called the Circus Oz Living Archive, a 4-year digital humanities project to create an online interactive video-based platform, a sort of community archive that will be owned and operated by a performing arts company to facilitate repertoire development and audience engagement for that company. The second is a spin-off art project, a programmatic video exhibition for galleries called Vault, the non-stop performing history of Circus Oz, which is very much a work in progress. It's opening in October. Both of these projects have been interdisciplinary and highly collaborative, and have involved a number of intersecting research agendas. My own interest in them as a writer and a creative arts researcher, and also as a former director of this circus, is in how they might suggest new ways to tell the multiple stories of this remarkable and significant arts company. By closely considering the materiality of the digital resources we have to work with, as well as paying attention to the ethos and aesthetics of the circus that is our object, we've made, I think, some interesting discoveries. We've moved from a notion of storytelling still attached to quite literal, linear and rightly forms to one that's far more playful and perhaps more nuanced in its multimodal embrace of orality and images, play with time, repetition and scale. Rather than with what Willem Crusoe calls alphabetic writing, we work increasingly with the writing of software code, with curatorial practices, and with improvised oral and visual encounters between human and machine memories. So first I want to talk briefly about the Living Archive project, and then I'm going to talk about the work in progress on this exhibition. A circus, even a contemporary circus, travels, it rehearses, it performs. The life of the circus is on the road, in the big tops and theatres in which it presents its show to audiences. And yet, often at the back of the theatre or the big top will be a camera, a video camera placed there by the circus to capture a record of its performances, to preserve what would otherwise disappear from visibility and recede into the memories of those who happen to be present. Also, to capture the scene of the performance as a member of the audience might have seen it, as the performers themselves could not otherwise. Circus Oz, one such contemporary circus, which is based in Melbourne, Australia, has been touring and performing across Australia and around the world since 1978. It's been an international leader in the art form and attained an iconic status in Australian culture. Over that time, it's filmed approximately 900 of its performances, typically aimed to record at least one performance from every season in each period of visits. Until recently, watching these videos, not to mention discovering and locating particular acts, performers or other items interest featured on them, was more challenging than recording in the first place. In 2010, the Living Archive research project began to digitise and transcode the Circus Oz performance video collection. The object of this project, apart from preserving the company's recorded history, was to build a web application around the video collection that would constitute a new arena in which to explore and understand, as well as to discuss and document, the broader history of the company of which the videos form traces. This publicly accessible web application we proposed would be a particular kind of digital archive. We would call this proposition the Living Archive. Within archival studies, there's been a reconsideration since the 1990s of the traditionally understood neutrality and objectivity of the archive, and the role of the archive as simply, in Nesmith's words, to, quote, document or mirror the world around the archives and to list, describe, copy and retrieve the records and thereby the knowledge already in them in a neutral, conspicuous and simply factual way. Quote. In the wake of postmodernist theory and influential texts such as DRHA's archive paper, as already been mentioned, archival theorists have highlighted the role of the archivist in mediating reality rather than reflecting it, through the complex process of selection, description and representation of records within an archive, a process DRHA calls archivization. There's inevitably a political dimension to archives and archivization. Archives and records will always reflect power relations, being active sites where social power is negotiated, contested and confirmed. Archivists, therefore, need to understand their roles and responsibilities as political players contributing to the shaping of cultural dynamics. In the words of Cook and Schwartz, the archivist is an actor, not a guardian, a performer, not a custodian. This designation of the archivist as performer out of archiving itself as an active performance clearly resonates especially strongly when we consider the context of an informal community archive of performing arts, such as the Circus Oz Living Archive. We're in the realm both of performance and of meta-performance. The Living Archive has been online and open to the public since 2013, with over 110 hours of video footage available for public viewing. We've developed a flexible database model structured around the concept of the clip. A clip can be any object in the database that includes time code references to a particular video or section of a video. This enables the videos, which are typically up to 2 hours long and made up of a single shot, to be virtually segmented and annotated, initially by the circus and potentially by any user. We've developed procedural and curated methods for dividing the videos into the various circus acts that make them up, and the tools for the circus themselves to be able to do this. We've also worked a lot with the circus on IP protocols and tools, and on a genealogy of circus acts, which actually there was no authority of one extant internationally to make our own one for this company. We've developed interfaces and database architecture such that users within and outside the circus can add stories to videos using the prompts "I was there and" or "I wasn't there but" attached to a particular video. We've also added a capacity for clips, which might be whole videos or acts or stories or other items in the database, to be collected by users in self-curated collections. Collections, like videos and stories, can of course be shared through social media. So our first impulse towards the Living Archive as what I call a storytelling engine was quite literal, a careful modification of the familiar social media concept of comments into stories, written anecdotes by performers, staff, circus audience members, online viewers, that thicken up and counterpoint the perspective of the video camera and its operator. This technology works fine, as does the affordability for collections, and we've seen some excellent examples added to the Living Archive. But, surprisingly enough or not, it's not as if it's gone viral and masses of people have jumped on and decided they want to write stories into the archive. And apart from anything else, circus people are not very vital. However, to date, it has shown its potential as a curatorial device, a platform, for instance, in which people such as Laurel Frank, who's costume designer for the circus, has made her own collections which guide people to particular videos in relation to certain elements of their costumes, such as the incredible chrome padding that she uses. As the prototypes of the Living Archive developed, and influenced by Mitchell Whitelaw's notion of generous interfaces, which basically tell you a lot about the overall breadth and flavour of a digital archive. Ruben Stanton's here, our interaction designer, has made a number of interfaces which tell the story of the archive itself in different ways. So the home page here presents a mosaic of different types of images and metadata types. The acts page provides a sense of patterns of different Circus Oz acts across time, a visually rich and responsive browsing environment using thumbnails. And the timeline page tells us how many videos from each year in the archives. It's 1978 at this end of 2013, this end. And also shows, this is a bit old, this screenshot now, but there's a kind of plumb line across the middle, and the ones that are above that are the ones that are actually public. So this is again, kind of through data representation, tells a story, if you like, through patterning of the nature of the archival collection. Finally, perhaps the most important text written so far about Circus Oz Living Archive is this, the API, the Application Programming Interface, written again by Ruben Stanton. The API becomes the device by which stories can be made not just within the fabric of archaeologists, but with Ernst. Ernst refocuses our attention on the double meaning of the verb to tell. The word telling refers not only to the act of communicating a narrative, it's also etymologically the act of counting. That's why we have both storytellers and bank tellers. Properties of digital media invite a rethinking of how histories are constructed. Ernst's work suggests the exploration of forms of telling other than linear historical narratives. So the history teller, this is like a very early prototype. It's not what's going to play in the end. The history teller emerges from the genre of data visualization. It will present a constantly changing video poster of random facts about the history of Circus Oz, drawn from the Living Archive database, with a few extra tricks thrown in. The stream of facts and images piles downwards as if pushed by gravity, by the weight of the flow of new data coming behind them. But this act embodies a form of telling as counting in the list-making tradition of historical annals. And whereas the history teller earnestly generates a theoretically unending and ever-changing array of images and facts about the history of this company, what we're calling the Wall of Wonders makes patterns out of the spectacle and beauty of the circus. Bodies in space, abstracted movement, colour and shape. The Wall of Wonders queries a curated set of video clips from the archive at random, presenting ever-changing arrays of animated GIFs in those videos. Meanwhile, in a back room, what we're calling the Marathon of Marvels will present the opposite of random fragments. Here, the act of telling is counting is, if anything, ridiculous in its fidelity and obsessiveness. Every Circus Oz performance available publicly on the archive will play in real time in chronological order from beginning to end across the 3-week lifespan of the exhibition. The Stockholm show, April 26, 1995, that'll be happening next Tuesday starting at 9:54 p.m. Each act in the Vault exhibition relies upon audience participation, more or less active, as does the circus itself. In the memory booth displays, we watch 23 past and present Circus Oz performers confronted with the sight and sound of their own past performances in the archive. The memory booth stages intimate encounters between embodied human memories and the memory of the digital machine inscribed with the traces of those same moving bodies 10, 20, 35 years earlier. These encounters across time generate in the performance a spontaneous new layer of oral stories, thoughts and emotional responses that counterpoint and overlay the sounds and images of the original archival footage. Once again, the stories and their telling is complicated, multiplied, arrayed in mutable sequences. And once again, as befitting a circus, each act relies on a complex and generous collaboration among all of the human actors involved, as well as between humans and the non-human objects they work with. The digital apparatus, hardware and software, coded images, sounds, lights, cameras.
I think this act worked probably quite well because we were in real life truly hugely competitive with each other. So we have no boundaries as to what's acting and what's real. And I am literally scared of it in real life. Look at how strong she is. So this is pre all accidents for me and Simone, so we seem very fearless.
Playing with these digital technologies enables reflection and conversation. What's the enduring meaning of a large-scale, ongoing collaborative art project like Circus Oz? As it proceeds to lay down new memories for new performances, what remains of them in a subsequent moment? What might be the enduringly ephemeral afterlife of its performances? The Living Archive provides a platform, and the Vault exhibition is attempting to stage some speculative answers to